I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reading the first line in the different classic novels that I have and choosing which classics I want to read in 2024 based on those first lines. I do have a couple of classic novels that I'm currently working through or that I know that I'm going to read next year. So for example, this year I started reading Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen and Anne of Green Gables, which is a reread for me by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Those two I'm not going to finish before the end of the year. I'm working through them kind of slowly as part of a project I'm working on behind the scenes, and I know that I'm going to be carrying those over into the next year. I also know of a couple other classics that I want to read more slowly as part of that same project next year, and I'm not going to be counting those in my classics count for this video. Overall, I would really love to read somewhere between 6 to 12 classics next year, not counting the ones that I have set aside for my project. I tend to have a hard time getting into them because some of them are really intimidating in their length. They can be huge tomes, and some of them just take some getting into because the language is a little bit different than our conversational English is today. It's a little bit denser and you have to slow down and take your time with it. And so if I'm not thinking about it, I tend to gravitate toward other genres that take a little bit less work to read. But most of the time when I do put the work into reading classics, I end up really enjoying them. I do collect them as well, so I'd like to just go through my collection today, read those first lines of them, and pick a few that I'd really love to read in 2024. I'm starting over here at this shelf where I keep my Penguin cloth-bound classics. I have read several of these already, so I'm going to primarily be focusing on the ones that I haven't read yet. I do know that in 2024 I'd really love to read Pride and Prejudice again. It's my favorite novel. I've read it several times, and I think it's one that I'd like to reread again in 2024. I didn't read it in 2023, and I've been wanting to, so I'll probably try to get to that pretty early in 2024. I'm going to start up here on this top shelf, and the first book that I'm going to read the first line for is Middlemarch by George Eliot. George Eliot was a woman who wrote under the pen name George Eliot. I think a lot of women actually wrote under men's names at the time, both to get published and so that people would read their books. This book has a prelude, and the first line of the first sentence of the prelude says, "Who that cares much to know the history of man and how the mysterious mixture behaves under the varying experience of time has not dwelt, at least briefly, on the life of Saint Teresa, has not smiled with some gentleness at the thought of the little girl walking forth one morning hand in hand with her still smaller brother to go and seek martyrdom in the country of the Moors." I know I want to read this at some point, but based on that first sentence, it's not really pulling me in just yet, so I think I'll probably end up saving that for another year. Next we have Bleak House by Charles Dickens. I've read a little bit of Dickens. I really enjoyed David Copperfield by him. I've tried to read Great Expectations several times and I've never finished it. It's one that I just have a really hard time getting into, but maybe this will be the year. I've heard a lot of people who say that they really like Bleak House, so let's see what the first sentence says. London, Michaelmas. Actually, the first sentence is London. Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. It's not quite gripping me. Next we have Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. This one begins with a prologue. Idle reader, I don't have to swear any oaths to persuade you that I should like this book, since it is the son of my brain to be the most beautiful, elegant, and intelligent book imaginable. That sentence does make me want to keep on reading, so I think I will put this one in the running, but let's go past the prologue to chapter 1 and see what that first sentence says. In a village in La Mancha, the name of which I cannot quite recall, there lived not long ago one of those country gentlemen or hidalgos who keep a lance in a rack, an ancient leather shield, a scrawny hack, and a greyhound for coursing. This one's a baby. Then we have Sanditon, which I just read this year, so I'm not going to read that one in 2024. Next, 1984 by George Orwell. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. I love that line. So this one's definitely in the running as well. Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell I have read in the last few years, so I'm going to skip that one. The Jungle Books by Rudyard Kipling. It was 7 o'clock of a very warm evening in the Seeonee Hills when Father Wolf woke up from his day's rest, scratched himself, yawned, and spread out his paws one after the other to get rid of the sleepy feeling in their tips. It's not grabbing me. Then we have Pride and Prejudice, which I know I want to read in 2024, so I'm going to skip that one for now. Northanger Abbey is another Jane Austen novel. I do have this one in mind as one that I'd like to read in 2024. I've been trying to work my way through all of her novels, and I haven't read this one yet. No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be an heroine. I just love her writing so much. Then I have a couple that were tucked back behind in there. The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes books. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who was usually very late in the mornings, save upon those not infrequent occasions when he stayed up all night, was seated at the breakfast table. I do want to read this at some point, but I don't know if I want to read it in 2024. Also hiding back behind there was Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. This is a book that I have started reading in the past. In fact, I'm up to chapter 6 in it, but I kind of lost interest. So I think I'm not even going to really consider this one, but I'll read the first sentence anyway. When Farmer Oak smiled, the corners of his mouth spread till they were within an unimportant distance of his ears. His eyes were reduced to mere chinks, and diverging wrinkles appeared round them, extending upon his countenance like the rays in a rudimentary sketch of the rising sun. Next we have Persuasion by Jane Austen, which I just read this year, so I'm going to skip that one. Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Now what I want is facts. I'm going to keep going. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else, and root out everything else. I'm kind of on the fence about that one. It doesn't seem as appealing as the other two I've got on the table, so I think I'm going to skip it for now. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of these gentlemen, having asked me to write down the whole particulars about Treasure Island from the beginning to the end, keeping nothing back but the bearings of the island, and that only because there is still treasure not yet lifted, I take up my pen in the year of grace 17, and go back to the time when my father kept the Admiral Benbow Inn, and the brown old seaman with the sabre cut first took up his lodging under a roof. Not this year. Next, The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I have a few of his books actually, particularly in my Penguin Black Spine Classics collection, which I'll look at after we've done with these. Under certain circumstances, there are few hours in life more agreeable than the hour dedicated to the ceremony known as afternoon tea. Oh, I like that sentence. I think I'll say maybe on this one. The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. This one has a prologue, and it looks like it's written in verse. And the first period shows up this far down. When in April the sweet showers fall, and pierce the drought of March to the root, and all the veins are bathed in liquor of such power as brings about the engendering of the flower, when also Zephyrus with his sweet breath exhales an air in every grove and heath upon the tender shoots, and the young sun his half course in the sign of the ram has run, and the small fowl are making melody that sleep away the night with open eye, so nature pricks them and their heart engages. Then people long to go on pilgrimages, and palmers long to seek the stranger strands of far-off saints, hallowed in sundry lands. And specially from every shire's end of England down to Canterbury they wend to seek the holy blissful martyr, quick to give his help to them when they were sick. I think I'm going to have to be in the mood to read this book, because it's very long, and it's all written in verse. So I'm going to put this one back on the shelf, and if it strikes my fancy at some point, I think I'll pull it off. It seems like one that, one, I will definitely have to be in the mood to read, and two, I might have to go slowly. The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. The first story in this collection is A Scandal in Bohemia. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. Then we have Emma by Jane Austen, which I would love to read in 2024 because, as I said, I'm working through Jane's works right now. And I do love her writing. She's my favorite author. But just for the sake of it, let's read the first sentence, shall we? Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. I just think she's so funny. I'll probably read this in 2024, but I'm going to put it back on the shelf instead of including it in my stack, because I've already got it in my head that Jane's works I will be continuing with this year. Next, we have Villette by Charlotte Bronte. I read Jane Eyre, I think last year. Loved it. 5-star read. Mr. Rochester is really messed up, but I loved the storytelling. And so I've been wanting to read more of Charlotte's writings. There aren't very many. The Bronte's writings are very limited. Like, we just don't have access to very many of them. So I'm kind of just pacing myself through them whilst also wanting to read them all at once. I did not love Wuthering Heights, which is a generous way of saying that I hated it. I think I gave it 1 star, and I knew going in it wasn't going to be a love story and that everyone was messed up, but I just found everyone in the book so unlikable, and I didn't find the story all that great, and I thought that people very much over-exaggerate the moodiness of the moors. So Emily is not my favorite Bronte sister. So far, I really like Charlotte's writings, and I've heard that I might like Anne's because she has maybe a more grounded, realistic approach to relationships. We'll see. Anyway, Villette. My godmother lived in a handsome house in the clean and ancient town of Breton. This might be good, but the first sentence is a little bit boring. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I know that there are a couple of book clubs that are going to be reading this book this year, so in theory, I'd really like to join in and read it with other people who are reading it at the same time. Sometimes that helps me get through these massive classics. Just knowing that I'm reading them with other people and we can take our time and like spread it out a little bit. We'll see. It's over 1,200 pages long and the font is tiny. It's little. It's just massive, but I know that it's a lot of people's favorite classic. I know it's going to be good. On February 24th, 1815, the lookout at Notre Dame de la Garde signaled the arrival of the 3-master Farran coming from Smyrna, Trieste, and Naples. As usual, a coastal pilot immediately left the port, sailed hard by the Chateau d'If, and boarded the ship between the Cap de Morgiou, I don't speak French, y'all, and the island of Rue. Well, aside from my French pronunciation being abominable and embarrassing, I don't know. The first sentence doesn't grab me, but I do really like the idea of reading this when other people are reading it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back, but pull it out a little to remember to consider this as one of my choices. Next, I have a stack of Pan Macmillan classics. These are such cute little editions. They come with dust jackets, but under the dust jackets, they have this light blue kind of embossed, I don't know if you can see it, but it's so pretty with gilded lettering on the spine. They're just such pretty little editions. This is Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. All true histories contain instruction, though in some the treasure may be hard to find, and when found, so trivial in quantity that the dry shriveled kernel scarcely compensates for the trouble of cracking the nut. I like that as a sentence. I'm going to put this in the maybe pile. The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. The first ray of light which illumes the gloom and converts into a dazzling brilliancy that obscurity in which the earlier history of the public career of the immortal Pickwick would appear to be involved, is derived from the perusal of the following entry in the Transactions of the Pickwick Club, which the editor of these papers feels the highest pleasure in laying before his readers as a proof of the careful attention, indefatigable assiduity, and nice discrimination with which his search among the multifarious documents confided to him has been conducted. I'm definitely not surprised that Dickens has managed to stretch one sentence out into an entire paragraph. A Glove Shop in Vienna and Other Stories by Eva Ibbotson. Ibbotson? It was mid-December and a night of snow. Sweet Danger by Marjorie Allingham. A small window in the sunlit yellow side of the Hotel Beauregard Mentone opened slowly, and through it a hand appeared, which, after depositing a compact brown suitcase upon the sill, speedily vanished. The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I have to admit, I kind of hope I will like the first sentence of this because I've never read The Secret Garden and I'd like to. When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, everybody said she was the most disagreeable-looking child ever seen. It was true, too. I'm going to put this on the maybe pile. Lark Rise to Candleford by Flora Thompson. I think this edition is actually 3 books in one. My husband and I really enjoyed the show. I think it's on BBC or BritBox, but it's called like Lark Rise to Candleford. I bought this around the time that we had finished watching it. The hamlet stood on a gentle rise in the flat, wheat-growing northeast corner of Oxfordshire. I know I want to read this at some point, but that sentence doesn't grab me. Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. While the present century was in its teens, and on one sunshiny morning in June, there drove up to the great iron gate of Miss Pinkerton's Academy for Young Ladies on Chiswick Mall a large family coach with 2 fat horses in blazing harness, driven by a fat coachman in a 3-cornered hat and wig, at the rate of 4 miles an hour. That's a lot of information. Then back here is Sense and Sensibility, which I know I'll be carrying over into next year. Wuthering Heights, Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This is another one that I would like to get to in 2024. About 30 years ago, Miss Maria Ward of Huntingdon, with only £7,000, had the good luck to captivate Sir Thomas Bertram of Mansfield Park in the county of Northampton, and to be thereby raised to the rank of a baronet's lady with all the comforts and consequences of an handsome house and large income. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, I have already read in the last few years, but I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It's one of my favorite novels. Tales from 1001 Nights. This is one that I believe I've started. Yep, I have, but I haven't finished it. Among the histories of past peoples, a story is told that in the old days, in the islands of India and China, there was a Sasanian king, a master of armies, guards, servants, and retainers, who had 2 sons, an elder and a younger. Oh, here we go. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I've tried with this one, y'all. Like at least 3 times. My father's family name being Pirrup and my Christian name Philip, my infant tongue could make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip. So I called myself Pip and came to be called Pip. I mean, I love the first paragraph, which is probably why I've tried it so many times. I do want to try at least one Dickens this year. Maybe this will be the one. I think I'll put it in the maybe pile, and if I come across a different Dickens that seems more appealing, I can switch it out. A Tale of Two Cities, also by Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of the noisiest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only. If I had edited this, it would have been a great many sentences, but Dickens made it only one. Then I have hiding back here. I believe this is War and Peace. Yep, War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy. This is another massive book, over 1,300 pages. Well, Prince, Genoa and Lucca are now nothing more than estates taken over by the Buonaparte family. I know I want to read this at some point. I don't know if I will get to it this year. I think if I'm going to attempt a massive tome like that this year, it will probably end up being Don Quixote and or The Count of Monte Cristo. Les Mis by Victor Hugo. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law both really love this book. I haven't read it. Every time I think about reading it, I just think it sounds so depressing. I've never seen the films either because they sound so depressing, but I know they must be good. In the year 1815, Monsieur Charles Francois Bienvenu Myriel was Bishop of Digne? I don't know. Ah, another Bronte, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne. You must go back with me to the autumn of 1827. No, I mustn't. The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. One evening of late summer before the present century had reached its 30th year, a young man and woman, the latter carrying a child, were approaching the large village of Weydon Friars on foot. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I actually ordered a different version of this. I ordered the one that has more of a burgundy cloth-bound cover with a warmer pink embossed design on it, but they sent me this one, and at the time I think I was just really overwhelmed and like lost in grief and stuff when it arrived, and so I ended up not exchanging it or complaining that they had sent me the wrong one. But at some point I would like to replace this one with that other one because I just think it's prettier, the other one, than this. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. That's pretty good. I would like to read this, but I don't think I'm going to end up, well, I don't know. I'll put it on the maybe pile. Then we have Jane Eyre, which I did love, and I might reread in 2024 as part of the project I'm working on, but we'll see how that goes. Animal Farm by George Orwell. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes. I know I want to read this one soon. I haven't read it yet. I haven't read any George Orwell, actually. So I'm going to put this in the maybe pile, not because I love that sentence, but because I really want to read this. Then there's Love and Friendship by Jane Austen, which I read this year and loved. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. I've read parts of this in the past, and it is so screwy. I don't really know how else to describe it. It's just so different. I have to be in the mood for it usually. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? I do like that. Then back here we have A Christmas Carol and Other Writings by Dickens. If I do read this next year, it'll be around Christmas time. It's got several different Christmassy stories in it. The first sentence is Christmas time with an exclamation point. I don't know. It's not calling to me. Oliver Twist, also by Dickens. Book the first, chapter the first. The chapter title is Traits of the Place Where Oliver Twist Was Born and the Circumstances Attending His Birth. First sentence. Among other public buildings in the town of Mudfog, it boasts of one which is common to most towns, great or small, to wit, a workhouse. And in this workhouse there was born on a day and date which I need not trouble myself to repeat, inasmuch as it can be of no possible consequence to the reader, in this stage of the business at all events, the item of mortality whose name is prefixed to the head of this chapter. That's a very long way of saying that Oliver Twist was born in a building in Mudfog. Don't get me wrong, I do love Dickens' wordiness, and I also tend to be quite wordy when I write, but his sentences can get a little bit long. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cloth-bound classics in that maybe stack so far, and 2 Pan Macmillans. I am going to add The Count of Monte Cristo to this pile too, which makes this a stack of 8, plus 2 Pan Macmillans. Now I also have a shelf down here with all of my Penguin Black Spine classics, and I have some classics mixed in with different colors of books on this shelf as well. One of them being Little Women, which I have in a set. I'm not sure if I want to count this as one of the classics I'm reading or as part of a series. I'm going to attempt to read at least the first book in several different series this year, and this might be one of them. We'll see. I have read a little bit of this already. I've read the first 2 chapters, and the 90s adaptation, the 90s screen adaptation of it is one of my favorite movies. It's just super nostalgic, but I do think I'll have my hands full with some Jane Austen and some other books this year for the project that I want this to be a part of, so I think I might end up putting this one off another year. But the first sentence is, Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Joe lying on the rug. Isn't that cover just so cute? Now for my Penguin Black Spine classics. The first one that I have in this stack is Nutcracker and the Mouse King by E.T.A. Hoffmann and The Tale of the Nutcracker by Alexandre Dumas. For the entire 24th of December, the children of Medical Officer Stahlbaum were not permitted to step inside the intermediary room, much less the magnificent showcase next door. The Lady of the Camellias by Alexander Dumas Fil. It is my opinion that you cannot create a convincing character until you have made a broad study of human nature, just as you cannot speak a foreign language until you have studied it thoroughly. Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone. I read this a few years ago, so I'm going to skip this one. North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I saw a screen adaptation of this that I really loved, but I haven't read the book yet. It looks like I started and got to page 10 or 11 before stopping. Edith, said Margaret gently. Edith. I know I want to read this. I don't think I'm going to end up reading it this year. Ruth, also by Elizabeth Gaskell. I have never seen this word used this way before, and my brain is reading it in a very immature way. I don't actually know how this word would be used in normal conversation, as I've never heard anyone else use it, and I've never seen it written anywhere else. So we're just going to go for it. There is an assize town in one of the eastern counties which was much distinguished by the Tudor sovereigns, and in consequence of their favour and protection attained a degree of importance that surprises the modern traveller. Also by Elizabeth Gaskell, Wives and Daughters. To begin with the old rigmarole of childhood. Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. Of late years, an abundant shower of curates has fallen upon the north of England. They lie very thick on the hills. Every parish has one or more of them. They are young enough to be very active and ought to be doing a great deal of good. But not of late years are we about to speak. We are going back to the beginning of this century. Late years, present years, are dusty, sunburnt, hot, arid. We will evade the noon, forget it in siesta, pass the midday in slumber, and dream of dawn. Those two sentences. I read two instead of one, but I kind of like that one. I'm going to stick that in a maybe pile. Howard's End by E.M. Forster. I've seen a screen adaptation of this that I liked, but I've never read the book. One may as well begin with Helen's letters to her sister. Howard's End, Tuesday. Dearest Meg, it isn't going to be what we expected. Evelina by Frances Burney. Gentlemen, the liberty which I take in addressing to you the trifling production of a few idle hours will doubtless move your wonder and probably your contempt. I think I like her already. The Complete Father Brown Stories by G.K. Chesterton. Between the silver ribbon of morning and the green glittering ribbon of sea, the boat touched Harwich and let loose a swarm of folk like flies, among whom the man we must follow was by no means conspicuous, nor wished to be. I'm going to pass on that one for now. Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope. Whether or no she whom you are to forgive, if you can, did or did not belong to the upper 10,000 of this our English world, I am not prepared to say with any strength of affirmation. Dr. Thorne, also by Anthony Trollope. Before the reader is introduced to the modest country medical practitioner who is to be the chief personage of the following tale, it will be well that he should be made acquainted with some particulars as to the locality in which, and the neighbours among whom, our doctor followed his profession. The Inheritance by Louisa May Alcott. She wrote Little Women, Little Men, Good Wives, and Jo's Boys. In a green park where troops of bright-eyed deer lay sleeping under drooping trees and a clear lake mirrored in its bosom the flowers that grew upon its edge, there stood Lord Hamilton's stately home, half castle and half mansion. Kristin Lavren's Daughter, Volume 1, The Wreath by Sigrid Undset. When the earthly goods of Ivar Jestling, the younger of Sundby, were divided up in the year 1306, his property at Sill was given to his daughter Ragnfrid and her husband Lavrans Bjorgulfsson. I actually came across a lot of names like that when I was working on my family tree and my ancestry, and I still don't quite know how to pronounce them. Utopia by Thomas More. There was recently a rather serious difference of opinion between that great expert in the art of government, His Invincible Majesty King Henry VIII of England, and His Serene Highness Prince Charles of Castile. The Penguin Book of Victorian Women in Crime, edited by Michael Sims. I turned a familiar corner and was soon threading the well-known avenues of Whitehall. A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. This I thought sounded really interesting during the pandemic. It was about the beginning of September 1664 that I, among the rest of my neighbours, heard in ordinary discourse that the plague was returned again in Holland, for it had been very violent there, and particularly at Amsterdam and Rotterdam in the year 1663, whither they say it was brought, some said, from Italy, others from the Levant, among some goods which were brought home by their Turkey fleet, Others said it was brought home from Candia, others from Cyprus. Second sentence. It mattered not from whence it come, but all agreed it was come into Holland again. Growth of the Soil by Newt Hampson. That long, long path over the moors and into the forest, who has trodden it? I like that sentence. Put this in the maybe pile. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I read this, or rather I started reading this a couple of years ago. I ended up DNFing it because I just didn't like the language it's written in. That said, there are some beautifully written cinematic scenes in this that are just incredible. There's a scene, a description rather, of a man on a tractor that is just so beautifully done. I don't remember what chapter it's in, or I would just read it to you, but instead of unhauling, I kept the book because of that scene, kind of describing an iron man on an iron horse and just the disconnection that big agriculture brought between farmers and the land. And I thought that that scene was so beautifully written that I kept it, even though I didn't really like the book enough to finish it. I'm not going to read it again this year. The Road Through the Wall by Shirley Jackson. The weather falls more gently on some places than on others. The world looks down more paternally on some people. Looking Backward, 2008 to 1887 by Edward Bellamy. I first saw the light in the city of Boston in the year 1857. The Bostonians by Henry James. Olive will come down in about 10 minutes. She told me to tell you that. About 10, that is exactly like Olive. Neither 5 nor 15, and yet not 10 exactly, but either 9 or 11. I like the way he starts his books. I've got The Portrait of a Lady in my Clothbound Classics stack over there, and I'm going to add this one to the maybe stack as well. The American, also by Henry James. On a brilliant day in May in the year 1868, a gentleman was reclining at his ease on the great circular divan which at that period occupied the center of the salon car in the Museum of the Louvre. I like the other two better than that one, so I'm going to pass on that one. Daisy Miller and Other Tales by Henry James. The most strictly impressive picture in Italy is incontestably The Last Supper of Leonardo at Milan. The Ambassadors, also by Henry James. Struther's first question when he reached the hotel was about his friend, yet on learning that Waymarsh was apparently not to arrive till evening, he was not wholly disconcerted. We're almost through. We're on this last row here. Now we're getting to some thick Dickens novels. Nicholas Nickleby. There once lived in a sequestered part of the country of Devonshire one Mr. Godfrey Nickleby, a worthy gentleman, who taking it into his head rather late in life that he must get married, and not being young enough or rich enough to aspire to the hand of a lady of fortune, had wedded an old flame out of mere attachment, who in her turn had taken him for the same reason. Thus 2 people who cannot afford to play cards for money sometimes sit down to a quiet game for love. Dombey and Son, also Dickens. Dombey sat in the corner of the darkened room in the great armchair by the bedside, and Son lay tucked up warm in a little basket bedstead, carefully disposed on a low settee, immediately in front of the fire, and close to it, as if his constitution were analogous to that of a muffin, and it was essential to toast him brown while he was very new. Okay, I like that. That's in the running. We'll see if I go with that. Something else, or Great Expectations. Little Dorrit, also Dickens. 30 years ago, Marseille lay burning in the sun one day. The Old Curiosity Shop, also Dickens. I love how instead of saying chapter 1, he says chapter the first. Night is generally my time for walking. Okay, I like that. In the summer, I often leave home early in the morning and roam about fields and lanes all day, or even escape for days or weeks together, but saving in the country, I seldom go out until after dark, though heaven be thanked I love its light, and feel the cheerfulness it sheds upon the earth as much as any creature living. I do like that, but I like how Dombey and Son made me laugh, so it's ranking a little higher at the minute. Our Mutual Friend, also by Dickens. In these times of ours, though concerning the exact year there is no need to be precise, A boat of dirty and disreputable appearance with two figures in it floated on the Thames between Southwark Bridge, which is of iron, and London Bridge, which is of stone, as an autumn evening was closing in. Barnaby Rudge by Dickens. In the year 1775 there stood upon the borders of Epping Forest, at a distance of about 12 miles from London, measuring from the Standard in Cornhill, or rather from the spot on or near to which the Standard used to be in days of yore, a house of public entertainment called the Maypole, which fact was demonstrated to all such travellers as could neither read nor write, and 66 years ago a vast number both of travellers and stay-at-homes were in this condition, by the emblem reared on the roadside over against the house, which, if not of those goodly proportions that maypoles were wont to present in olden times, was a fair young ash 30 feet in height, and straight as any arrow that ever English yeoman drew. One sentence. I think that's all of my Dickens. Although I do have an antique set of Dickens downstairs that is more extensive, but I don't really want to use those as reading copies, so we'll just go by what I do have reading copies for. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. If anybody cares to read a simple tale told simply, I, John Ridd, of the parish of Ware, in the county of Somerset, yeoman and churchwarden, have seen and had a share in some doings of this neighbourhood, which I will try to set down in order, God sparing my life and memory. That's a little wordy for me at the minute. Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. This is the play that My Fair Lady is based off of. And the first spoken line of the play is spoken by the daughter. I'm getting chilled to the bone. What can Freddie be doing all this time? He's been gone 20 minutes. James Joyce, Dubliners. There was no hope for him this time. It was the third stroke. That sounds foreboding, doesn't it? The 12 Caesars by Suetonius. I know I don't want to read that this year, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it back. Well, I did pull a stack of 7 Black Spine classics out, so that adds to our pile. Now, I also know I have some other classics mixed in, like this Virginia Woolf and a couple of other random ones, and I also have some classics on my Black History and Social Justice shelf, but I think I'm going to go through those separately and count them as part of a different category. So for now, I'm going to stick with these. We have 16 possibilities, and I'd like to narrow that down to somewhere between 6 and 12. So I think I'm going to put a few back. I'm going to keep Dombey and Son out and probably put away Great Expectations, The Bostonians. I'm going to keep out and probably put away The Portrait of a Lady. I'm going to put away Growth of the Soil. I'm going to put away Evelina and Howard's End. For now, at least. I'm going to keep out Agnes Grey and Shirley, because that gives me a couple of Brontes to work through. And then I think I will put away Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Anna Karenina. And that will leave me with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think that's pretty good. And if I feel like reading a different one during the year, then I can always switch. But that seems like a pretty good selection that I will be able to choose from throughout 2024, in addition to some of the others that I know I'm going to keep reading, like the Jane Austen novels and some of the other ones. So, in conclusion, what we have left is The Count of Monte Cristo, Animal Farm, 1984, Don Quixote, The Secret Garden. If I can find a reading copy that will be a little bit more pleasant of a reading experience than this, I'll probably pick one up. These little editions are really pretty, but they're super tiny, and so I don't always love reading out of them, but we'll see. If I have to read out of this one, it's not going to be a big deal. We also have Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, The Bostonians by Henry James, and Dombey and Son will be my Dickens for the year. I would love to hear if there are any classics that you've really loved, if you've read classics outside of school ever. I didn't really used to like them in school, but I've come to appreciate them since then. And these days when I read them, as long as I take my time with them and allow myself to really just get into them, I end up really enjoying a lot of them. So I'd love to hear about any recommendations you may have. And if you're interested in buddy reading any of these, feel free to let me know, because I really like buddy reading classics because it helps me stick with them. So if you've ever wanted to read any of these but find them intimidating, or maybe don't want to read them on your own, that's definitely something we could explore. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.